Hello?
Good evening to you, sir.
I say, I like your new yachting blazer. Did you know I'm Britain's secret boring weapon?
Kiss me, Kenneth. You don't know what agony it's been. Yearning for you, yearning to give you my all.
But I don't want your all. I don't even want a little bit.
I will not be put off. Not after I've done for you.
Mitchell, no, please. Oh, your hand.
Maybe I could do something wild with a couple of creepers up his trellis.
Well, no. Here we are. Autumn's come round.
Kenneth, restrain yourself a little, please.
I'm virile. I'm butch.
Kenneth Williams' memorable performances on radio, television and film made him one of the best-loved comedians of his generation.
Good evening.
Kenneth was the funniest man I think I've ever met.
What do you want?
I'm your roommate.
Oh, no, you're not.
Come on, stop messing about.
But to many people, and certainly to Kenneth Williams himself, comedy was only a part of his extraordinary appeal.
I'm a cult figure, you see. I'm an enormous cult. I am. I'm one of the biggest cults you'll get round here, huh?
Kenneth was, in the best sense, a brilliant show-off.
I look in the mirror and think, what a dish, I think.
He was a melancholic, depressed man shot through with moments of delight.
He was a very angry, unhappy, lonely man who, out of that, found a tremendous kind of comedy.
I mean, they all think I'm the most diverting, original, brilliant, energetic creature that ever walked across a stage.
He was a man with so many facets, so many characters, and he wanted you to see them all at once, immediately. Now, 12 of them, one after the other. I mean, he would... If one said, you know, would the real Kenneth Williams stand up, I don't think he could. I don't think there really was such a person. Or, if there was, I think he kept that Kenneth Williams behind closed doors.
Behind closed doors for 40 years, Kenneth Williams kept a diary. When it was published after his death in 1988, it revealed the gap between the public performer and the intense and solitary private man.
He had a feeling of exclusion from the common pursuits of others. It must have been difficult for him to have been him, I think.
Kenneth Williams' solution to the problem of being him was a great success for a very long time. He invented a comic persona that brought him the love and applause of an admiring public, but his dependency on the character he created ultimately cost him dear.
I could have been another Sir John Gingold. Where's my early promise? I've had medals for acting and a certificate for tap dancing.
From childhood, Kenneth Williams had a sense that he didn't belong. The upper-class vowels he became known for were at odds with his true origins in a working-class area of London, just north of King's Cross, where he was born in a one-room flat in 1926. The family later moved to the poorer fringes of Bloomsbury, when Kenneth's father, Charlie, a hairdresser and barber, started a business which still trades today. Kenneth and his father never got on. He was a huge disappointment to Charlie, who wanted a son as tough as he was, as Kenneth's only sister Pat revealed in a radio interview shortly before her death.
Nobody got on with Charlie Williams. He was a real old-fashioned Victorian bully. And Ken used to just look at him with utter contempt.
A man I remember once came into the shop. Oh, I'd like a blow wave. And he said, blow? You'll get no blow waves from me. I'm not doing no blow waves. What are you, blooming iron? Iron off? Iron? I'm not having no irons in my shop. Get out.
He wanted somebody rough and ready, shall we say. Well, not a bully man, but, tough. Well, I always say that's the good old Cockney, isn't it, really? And Kenneth wasn't. He was very, very quiet sort of boy, you know.
Kenneth found an escape. He invented a make-believe game populated by characters all played by himself.
So we used to play our game. And Ken was every other voice. I was only ever me. Right, you ready then? And these stories he'd cook up, and they could be anything. Today we're going for a picnic. How are we? You can use a red MG today, and he would describe exactly where we were going, what we were going to have to eat, who the other people at the picnic were, and home again. That was good, wasn't it? Yeah, I enjoyed that day out in the country, and I really felt as if I'd been in the country.
This rich fantasy life was not the only result of Kenneth's conflict with his father. From his earliest days, all his love was focused on his mother, Louis.
The real family strength was between Kenneth and his mother. And he said in his diary, "I will never love anyone, never anyone as much as I love her." He just realized there would be no other important relationship in his life.
I do love Louis. She's the only person I've ever loved. By love, I mean caring so much that it's altruistic, and feeling her presence when she's not physically there, and missing her.
Louis was very fussy. If there was any mess on the floor, she said, "Look at this mess, it's disgusting." And Kenny would follow around after me with a bit of rag and say, "Look at this mess, simply disgusting."
But there was another reason why Kenneth was always Louis's favourite, a reason that remained a family secret that no one could ever talk about. Pat was illegitimate, conceived when Louis had been engaged to a man who later abandoned her. 3 years later, Charlie stepped in and married her, but it wasn't a love match. That came when Kenneth was born.
Ken was her idol. She idolised him ever since he was a baby. You know, it was just, I suppose because he was legitimate. He was her baby boy, yeah. And everything was for Kenny. And I suppose Pat felt that she didn't belong anymore.
Then Dad would come home with his present, you see. Present for his son. Here you are, mate. And I'd go, "Oh, good, where's mine?" "You ain't got no present." It's for the boy. And Ken would open this parcel, see? A pair of boxing gloves. And he'd hold them out in each hand. "What am I supposed to do with these?" "Put them on your bleeding fist and have a fight." "No, thank you." And he'd just drop them in my father's lap and walk out the room.
But Kenneth's defiance of his father could only go so far. After he starred as Princess Angelica in a school play, Charlie Williams tried to push his son in a very different direction.
He said to me, "Acting's rubbish. You've got to have a trade, boy. You must have a trade." It was all din. You've got to have a trade.
And so Kenneth left school at 14 to pursue a career his father approved of, cartography. His apprenticeship was cut short, however, during the Blitz, when he was evacuated to Bicester, to the home of a bachelor veterinary surgeon. Kenneth had his first taste of educated middle-class life, and he loved it.
The house was spacious as far as I was concerned. I'd come from very cramped quarters. It was this spacious with four-poster beds, candelabras he gave you to light your way up to bed, and a room full of fabulous books. His library was enormous.
Kenneth immersed himself in a whole new lifestyle and returned to London with a new accent.
I think that's where he got the posh voice and all that, you know. I think he mixed with people that were well-heeled.
Bicester had a lasting impact on him in other ways.
When he was evacuated, he was on the bus somewhere and an older man got on and put his hand on his knee, and I think it went a bit further than that. And Kenneth said that, you know, when the guy got off the bus, it was possibly the happiest days of Kenneth's life so far. And why not?
In 1944, Williams was drafted into the army. and a year later sent to the Far East to fight the Japanese, one of the more unlikely soldiers in the British Army.
It wasn't his scene, the army, really. If he was ordered to do something he didn't like to do, he done his absolute utmost to get out of it. He didn't take very kindly to military discipline and certain military activities. Perhaps he tended to appear a bit effeminate.
I'd always had my own room, even when we were evacuated. I had my own room, you know. And suddenly, in this barrack room, I used to take the trousers down, put the pyjama bottoms on, and then do the rest. And they rumbled it in the barrack room and said, "Oh, you're frightened of showing us your willy?" And after that, you know, I became quite uninhibited after that.
Clearly not cut out to be a soldier, he soon shone off the training ground.
There was about 20 of us in a hut with double bunks, and when the lights went out, that's when Kenneth started his little act. He used to get up with a torch and shine it on himself and start reciting silly poems and stories, and I don't know where he got these stories from. I think some of them was from his real life, actually. And he had us in absolute fits. If the chance came, he would take somebody else straight away.
Oh, good dear! For heaven's sake, man, pull the stomach round to the front!
Which a lot of the officers didn't like at the time.
Kenneth was a natural performer and a perfect recruit for a new unit that would become a legend. Combined Services Entertainment. Here, military life met show business to entertain the troops. Fellow members of the unit included comedian Stanley Baxter and film director John Schlesinger, then a conjurer.
CSE, for all of us, was our first kind of encounter, as it were, with being professional performers. And I think that Kenneth was a genuine original. I remember the voices, I think, from day one.
For many, CSE was a liberating experience. It was a place where some performers could openly acknowledge their homosexuality.
It was the first time one was able to be open about sexuality at that period. I mean, it was impossible otherwise, but there were so many like-minded people in an entertainment unit that it was something of a revelation.
Kenneth had by now begun to keep a pocket diary. It offers a revealing glimpse of his growing unease with his sexuality.
Having a very vivid social life, I think. Met Peter in town, very camp conversation. P was looking for talent. Malaya C, I think that must be Malaya Club, getting quite gay. Now, I think that's the homosexual meaning of gay being used in 1947, although the show that Kenneth was in at the time was called Going Gay, so you could never quite tell. The last thing in the entry, and this happens a lot, this phraseology about this time, no traditional worries. I think that means no sexual contact.
He was quite troubled by his sexuality. Some of us had much greater ability to come to terms with it, I think. But he didn't, and would talk about it to a certain extent and make jokes about it sometimes and be funny, but at the same time he could be quite disapproving, and I suspect that he was never very comfortable about it.
Williams returned to London in 1947, determined to go on the stage, but not as a comic or entertainer. His ambition was to be a serious actor. For 5 years, he learned his trade in weekly repertory companies, but became frustrated by what he saw as a lack of vision in the theatre. He wanted to run his own theatre company, and he joined forces with fellow actress Rachel Roberts and 4 like-minded colleagues.
We used to call it, laughingly, the movement. And we wanted to be together as a company and present serious and contemporary work. Kenneth was very committed to this idea, and he said, for heaven's sake, we must go and do it somewhere. Let us hire a tent, if necessary.
His approach to theatre in those early years was curious. It was almost socialistic, you would say. But he wanted a communal theatre, an egalitarian theatre, and almost a socialistic one, where everybody was on the same level. They were all chums. There was a bit of J.B. Priestley in this, The Good Companions and so on, too, I think.
But attempts to find financial backing failed, and the group disbanded. Bitterly disappointed, Kenneth went back to live with his parents and took refuge in his other major passion, educating himself.
He was a very serious thinker. He was very, very well informed because he read a lot. He was always interested in literature, in history, and had this amazing memory.
Kenneth claimed that every day of his life he learnt 4 new words from the dictionary and a new poem. But his theatrical and bookish pursuits only widened the rift between him and his father.
I don't know whether I'm allowed to tell you what the name he called him, but he said, Puff.
He had this strange family around him, this hairdresser father who you have to go through the shop to get up to the apartment above where his mother and his sister, I remember meeting and having tea with. The father would say, "Who are you?" And as you come to see Kenneth, "Kenneth, one of your Ponzi friends here."
I thought it was a goat. I didn't know. Mistake.
He won roles in television dramas and feature films, although fight scenes were never quite his style. But what he really wanted was success on the stage. His big break finally came in 1954 when he was cast as the Dauphin in a West End production of George Bernard Shaw's St. Joan.
He was certainly the best Dauphin I have ever seen in many productions of St. Joan. He was rigorously inside the role. Mind you, there's an awful lot of Kenneth in the Dauphin, an awful lot of the Dauphin in Kenneth, but it was a fully thought-through performance.
St. Joan was a critical triumph for Williams and marked the turning point in his career, but perhaps not in the way he might have imagined. He was spotted by Dennis Mayne Wilson, a BBC producer, who was on the lookout for talent for a new type of radio show.
We decided with Tony that we would like to do a situation comedy on radio without any funny voices and just character comedy without jokes or funny voices. And instead of getting different actors, we decided to get one person to do the lot. And Dennis Mayne Wilson came into us after one show. He said, I've just found him, wonderful actor. He said, he's playing the Dauphin in St. Joan. So we said, well, that sounds ideal, situation comedy. You know. So he said, well, as long as he said no funny voice. He said, no. So this rather strange-looking young man came to read through. And Ken came out with this one. He said, good evening. And I was like, hello. And it's a funny voice straight away. And of course, when he did it on the show, got an enormous laugh.
Come in.
Good evening.
And instead of having the courage to say, look, we're trying to do away with funny voices, we said, oh, we'll use it.
Radio was the ideal medium for the skill Williams had perfected since childhood, doing voices.
The style character, the good evening, don't stop messing about, that became a part of the show that everybody waited for. And in that case, Hancock was the feed. I mean, Hancock could be feeding him. I mean, it was Hancock's half hour, it wasn't Williams's half hour. And as such, Tony didn't mind at all taking her back seats occasionally.
As in this sketch, in which Hancock, disguised as a woman, is accosted by the Williams character known as Snide.
Good morning, cheeky. Want to come to the pictures with me?
hop it. Go on, get out of it, get out of it. Go on, go on.
Don't be like that. I saw you wink at me.
I didn't wink at you. Me false eyelash flopped down. Look, buzz up, go on, hop it, hop it.
I think you're smashing.
I'll slosh you in a minute.
Oh, that's it, I like girls with a bit of spirit.
Ken had 4 basic voices. He had his snide voice.
Oh, no, stop messing about.
Then he had his Felix Aylmer voice.
That all your lives, your faith, your services.
Felix Aylmer was a very elderly actor at the time, very straight out. He had this wonderful plummy voice.
The picture on the front cover is of a young girl in a leopard skin bikini.
And Ken did an impression of him.
Is she in the case?
No.
What a pity.
He's Lieutenant Nigel Bowser Smythe voice, very upper class twit.
Sergeant Plunger?
Sir.
Get the arc light set up.
Yes, sir.
Right, chaps, cordon off the area, 200 yards.
Good evening.
Go away, please. This is not a sideshow.
Then he had his Cockney, which was a broad, I suppose, an impression of his father, I suppose.
Here you are, mate. Blabbermouth Building. There'll be 6 and 9.
I'm not paying that. It's only a mile and a half.
Yeah, but we come a long way round so I could wave to my girl.
You seem to collect voices like other people collect stamps. Do you, in fact, borrow them from people that you've met, or do you just pluck them from the air?
Oh, yes, so they are taken from people I've known, you know, pinched, I suppose. The snide voice, that stop messing about one. I met this boy who was working the Mint, and he was describing how you were searched when you left the Mint, in case they suspected that you were taking out anything that you shouldn't be. And he described me, it had a perpetual smile on his face, and said, you know, you have to be very, very careful, because otherwise, you see, they make you take your clothes off, and so I thought it was a very good idea there.
I listen to your radio show every week. I think it's rotten. All except that bloke with the funny voice. He's a scream, isn't he? Oh, he has me in stitches. You know, there are actually people like that.
He turned out to be a grotesque, which is quite essential. Some of your great comic characters are basically grotesques. Frankie Hale was a grotesque. Tommy Cooper, in his own way, was a grotesque. And Ken had this quality, it's a quality. It's not natural. It's supernatural in a way, you know.
I do impressions, you know.
Oh, really?
Yes. That's a pig.
And very good, too.
But Williams' time on the Hancock show was far from happy. He believed that Tony Hancock resented his success.
You're like all the rest, you don't like me now.
No, I don't.
Oh, come on, let's be chums, make up.
No.
When the show transferred to television, Williams' role in it diminished, and he blamed Hancock, convinced he didn't want his company, either on or off the show.
Had a chat with Tony. I don't think he wants me in the setup in future. He thinks that set characters make a rut in story routine. The only one he wants back in October is Sidney James. He's mad about him, and nowadays they go everywhere together.
Ken seemed to feel that Tony resented him and wanted to get rid of him. And as far as I knew, nothing was further from the truth. We were trying to get the subject matter and the characters more realistic. Less cartoony, less farcical, more character-driven. There was nothing to do with any jealousy on Tony's part, or any resentment, or any worry about Ken taking... Nothing like that at all. It was just a purely professional decision, and in my opinion, a correct one.
Williams was by now living in the first of a succession of small Spartan flats he would always inhabit alone. He shunned close personal relationships, and the diary became his confessional and his confidant.
Really, he says, fundamentally, and he puts it in italics and underlined, diaries are about loneliness, and his certainly was. And it's having some sort of echo in your head of a voice that otherwise would have been another person's voice. If he'd been sharing his domesticity with somebody, having conversations at the end of the day, how did your day go? That would have been fine. There would have been no need for a diary. Because there was no such person, or because it was only Louis whose understanding of his feelings was necessarily terribly limited, he had to put it in writing.
Did the Hancock show from the Piccadilly? It was a general disaster. Really terrible. This team is so dreary to me now, especially James and Hancock, so listless and disinterested, and their conversation is real pleb stuff. I don't care for any of them at all.
If people had asked me, you know, in the 50s when I was working for him, who is one of the happiest people you've ever met, I would say Ken Williams, because he's always laughing, very funny man, life and soul of the party. And then 30 years later, I picked up his diaries to find out that he hated every minute of it. I mean, I've never been so astounded in my life when I read the diaries, because they bore absolutely no resemblance to what, as far as I'm concerned, actually took place.
Yes, they are angry, they are waspish, they are bitter, but they are beautiful jobs of writing. And I think that was his release, if you like. That was where he went to himself in private and told himself the real story.
At the heart of the real story for Williams was his inability to come to terms with his homosexuality. His diaries reveal he was tormented by this throughout his life.
I feel a sexual nature which I am thoroughly ashamed and disgusted by, and it colours all my life. Everything.
He disapproved of being queer. Very, very definitely. And that was the tragedy of his life, poor Tony.
Homosexual acts were illegal until 1967, and for Kenneth Williams they were also deeply sinful. All his life, Williams was at war with his sexual impulses.
The sight of a navvy working in the street, stripped to the waist and gold-tanned flesh and muscles, and I'm back in square one, full of guilt and shame. Even if I did it, I know I couldn't live with sex.
How is your love life? How do you rate yourself as a lover?
Oh, I'm not, I know I'm asexual. I should have been a monk. I should have been a monk. No, I'm only interested in myself, and I would regard any kind of relationship as deeply intrusive. I mean, I regard, privacy is the most important thing in my life, and anything which invaded that would be a threat. So consequently, I live a life of celibacy. I'm not interested in the other.
But when he was in his early 30s, Williams did enter into a physical relationship that was the closest he came to sharing his life with another. In 1958, he met 21-year-old Australian Paul Florence. The two were close for 4 years, and after Florence returned to Australia, they visited each other and corresponded right up until Kenneth's death.
When I see your familiar handwriting, when I read lines only you can write, then I am plunged back into the past. I am that tearful, slobbering suitor of Ensley Court days, and I begin to wonder if anything really alters.
I feel that Kenneth did love me. When we first met, I was bowled over by him. There was a bond between us which was very important to him and important to me. At one point it was even suggested that he and I shared an apartment in the early days.
I still can't get over seeing you, so unchanged and so dishy. Oh, it was all so right, wasn't it? That drink at the Wentworth was full of excitement for me, seeing you at the bar ordering, the heart pumping loud as a drum.
But his view about sex was one of fear. I think he viewed the act of sex as something that was not and could never be part of his makeup. He felt that any physical relationship, no matter what form it took, could be for him perhaps a form of destruction, but his sexual urges were the same as anybody else's.
But in future, Williams' relations with men were confined to brief encounters.
And so what there was instead was what he called in the diary traditional activity, which I think was just a sort of a disguised expansion of trade, pickups of various kinds, and that was his sex life, always with these big, strong men that he wanted. He always said he wanted strong arms to hold him. This is obviously what he wanted from Charlie, and emphatically never got.
There were casual relationships whereby perhaps he'd have people back to his flat, but it never really developed into anything, but it was partly to satisfy a fantasy. But once he was faced with the reality of the person there, nothing really ever followed through from it.
Williams' extreme sexual repression drove him into another make-believe world.
He said, I have my own fantasies, and no human being could live up to them.
I think because his imagination had always been fantastically vivid, and because his the margins of his life were populated by beautiful people like road diggers and so on, stripped to the waist, it had to be masturbation. That was his chief sexual activity throughout his life, referred to by him as the Barclays, a Barclays Bank in rhyming slang. And he was obviously a dedicated artist when in this form.
My world revolves about myself. First thing in the morning, I look in the mirror and think, oh, that, you know, what a dish, I think, all that, you know, this wonderful figure, I mean, you know, and this hair, spun gold, it's been described. I've been described as, you know, a head of spun gold. I hope they're getting it in colour.
Snow blizzard whirling outside the windows all day. I hoovered the carpet in the lounge, dressing only in bathing trunks. It was very daring, and the atmosphere was charged with sex. If anyone had walked in, they would have been irresistibly attracted.
He was tremendously narcissistic, and this could take the simplest forms, just looking in the mirror and realizing how beautiful he was. There would be a sort of transport of narcissism then that would reach to erotic heights. And I think the Barclays, the famous Barclays Bank, would follow.
While Williams could never accept his homosexuality, what he did, incredibly successfully, was exploit it in his professional life. In 1958, Williams joined the cast of the radio programme Beyond Our Ken, which later became the hit show Round the Horn. Together with Hugh Paddock, he created a legendary double act featuring the adventures of two outrageously camp chorus boys, Julian and Sandy.
Oh, hello, I'm Julian. This is my friend Sandy.
Well, what sent you trolling off round the world like you did?
Oh, it's the call of the sea, Mr. Horn.
Yes.
The call of the sea. When I get it, I can't resist it.
He can't resist it. He can't, that's right. When he gets the call, he's got to go. He's got to, haven't you, Jules?
Oh, like a shot. Like a shot, I'm on.
Yes, he's off like a shot.
So I said, well, I'm game.
And he is, Mr. Horn. Oh, no, Ducky. Oh, there's no one game here.
It was the first time that a couple of camp gentlemen had really ever been heard on radio. Ever. And we were astounded, I think, that it got past the censor, because we had a censor then, of course. But it did.
It was a sort of conspiracy, I always used to think, between the 8 million people who listened, who each would say individually, well, I understand it, but I don't think my next-door neighbour does.
I was recommended to a fashionable firm of solicitors in Lincoln's Inn. The brass plate on the door read, Boner Law. Hello, anybody there?
Oh, hello, I'm Julian. This is my friend Sandy. I've got my articles and he's taken silk.
Frequently. Well, Mr. Horn, what brings you trolling in here?
Well, can you help me? I've erred.
Yeah, we've all erred, Ducky. I mean, it's common knowledge, isn't it, Jules?
Oh,
Look, will you take my case?
Well, it depends on what it is. We've got a criminal practice that takes up most of our time.
Yes, but apart from that...
With a regular audience of 8 million, Round the Horn was the most popular radio show of its day. Williams enjoyed his time on the programme, chiefly because of the show's urbane straight man, Kenneth Horn. Williams adored him.
For Kenneth Williams, Kenneth Horn was the father he never actually had. I mean, his own father was a rather gruff, homophobic, "Here's a pair of boxing gloves, you make a man of him." And Kenneth Horne was just a very, very dear man, a very sweet, decent chap. And I think Kenneth thought, if only he would be my father, and he just responded very much to him in that way. And I think Kenneth Williams all his life was looking for an ideal father. I think really, if you could put one line together to explain Kenneth Williams, it was Kenneth Williams in search of his father, the father he really wanted.
But with the rest of the cast, Williams' ego was all too evident as he fought to be the centre of attention.
Egotist, everywhere. I think he would have preferred to have played them all, to have done all the parts. I think he would have really, my part, everybody's part, all the women, everything. And he'd have been awfully good, I'm sure, awfully talented.
Kenneth thought that he could make a show work by himself, without any help from anyone. But everybody needs somebody.
Kenneth Williams, the first thing he said, I remember it very vividly, he said, well, what we want him for, we can do all the voices. What's he come in for? What do you want to get him for? In front of me, of course. I mean, you know, that was Ken.
If you met him for the first time, and he would size you up, and if he thought you were somebody out of his reach or alien to him, he'd probably tell you one of his dreadful, dreadful jokes, bum jokes we used to call them. And if you were offended by it, he'd keep on and on and on until he'd hammered you into the ground. It was as if some demon had got into him sometimes.
I've been held back. I could have been a star. I could have been a star. Or I could have been somebody. I could have been somebody that could have come out to my house. They're going to come out to my house and knocking on my door and making me a very nice proposition. There, it's out. It's out.
He was so suppressed that it came bursting out in comedy.
And I'm glad.
The other actors are very kind of laid back. Kenneth Horne was archetypally English laid back. And then you get Kenneth, this little manic, furious man.
Can we go on now?
Yeah, it's all right. What is on the phone, Mr. Horne?
And all the suppression, all the rage, all the loneliness came out in those performances, and that's why they were so mesmeric.
Williams had become a radio star, but success made little impact on the way he lived his life. He discouraged visitors to his home, and the few who were allowed into his flat were amazed by what they saw.
I've never walked in to any house which was just drab. There was nothing on the wall. There were just gray walls, these two chairs, a rug, and one solid piece of furniture, really. And that was all. It was startling in its absence of texture. There was just no color, no life in the room, no joy in the room.
His musical taste at that time was Lieder. He used to listen to this very kind of esoteric Lieder. Hated me using the lavatory as well. Didn't want me to do that.
When we went to Williams' flat on one occasion, we weren't allowed to use the toilet, for instance, while we were there having our coffee. We had to sit on the floor because he's got no furniture, only cushions. He said, can't use the toilet, can't use the toilet here. I won't have people using the toilet. I had to go down and use the toilet in Baker Street Station.
I've only met, I think, one person who claimed to have used it. Even his own sister, Pat, was debarred from the bathroom.
He even put plastic over the stove to keep things from penetrating. And see, I think that's rather telling. I mean, he didn't like being penetrated in any sense of the word. This was really a little cave of consciousness that he had there. I mean, nothing came in except him.
Williams spent the money success had brought him not on himself, but on his parents, for whom he now bought a flat in Kensington. The real power in the family had shifted from Charlie to his son.
As Kenneth was getting more famous, Charlie had to toe the line. Couldn't say what he really thought, you know, because of Louis, and everything had to be just so for Kenneth.
Kenneth naturally, because he was so close to Lou, took the side of his mother against his father. And I remember on one occasion I was over at the flat that Kenneth had bought for them for tea, and the disdain with which he treated his father, and almost like him and Lou were together, was sort of, you know, almost hurtful. And I don't know how his dad took it, but that was just the sort of way that it was.
Louis increasingly lived her life through her son and was always his most loyal fan.
Louis always was at every broadcast. She used to sit about 2 rows from the front. And it was, to my mind, a very weird sort of relationship, mother-son relationship, because all his most salacious remarks or lines in the script would always be directed straight at his mother. She just lapped it all up, probably thought he's funnier than all the rest.
In the late 50s and early 60s, Williams was in big demand. As well as radio, his name topped the bill in a string of West End revues. Revue was an ideal vehicle for Kenneth's high-camp, quick-fire style, and he became a master at controlling an audience. The revue that launched him in 1957 was written by an unknown Cambridge undergraduate.
He was absolutely perfect for the part, was the first thing. It was a rather zany revue, centred actually on a character very like him, who had the same sort of quirky separateness from everything that was going on around him, sort of someone who stood back and sent up and commented on. So I couldn't believe when I came to the first rehearsals that there was anyone who would say exactly what, you know, I needed. And then as a person, he was easily the funniest person I'd ever met at the time. I just was astonished.
Orange, pink, maroon, gray, violet, brown, blue, orange, green.
What a ridiculous colour for a suit.
Lettuce green, if you don't mind.
Kenneth was in the middle of it, like a sort of malevolent elf, and he wasn't like a real person, almost.
Oh, don't worry about them. They don't like my lettuce green suit, and they don't like the fact that I grew my own lettuce just from an ordinary packet of seeds.
He primped around and his little bum stuck out, and I mean, it was weird. It was a weird experience. He was hysterically funny, but like something from another planet.
I told the producer, I said, oh no, I am an actor. She said, your secret is safe with me. Charming.
The sketch-based format of revue was a perfect opportunity for Williams to win extra laughs through his own inventiveness. He became a notorious ad-libber.
A 5-minute sketch could go on for 20 minutes, and he would beat the audience into submission, I mean, and then go beyond it. So the audience began to shuffle uncomfortably because it became quite scary.
One day, he just rushed me into another room and he said, now look, you and I have got to remember that we're the ones who are going to go up there and take it. And, you know, we've got to protect ourselves. He said, what we have to do with this piffle is ad-lib it and be prepared to improvise round it.
Outrageous was how critics described Williams in review, but the impulse behind his behaviour was very serious. He now topped the bill. His reputation was on the line, and he could not allow himself to fail.
I think his index of success was always the laugh, and even in circumstances where it was not appropriate to hear laughter, he was not averse to hearing it as long as he'd caused it. Certainly as long as it wasn't being caused at his expense. That was the worst thing.
As Fenella Fielding discovered when she put an end to one of Kenneth's tirades with a show-stopping ad-lib of her own.
The show in the evening went well, till Madam decided to ad-lib one line just before the tag in Spies. Of course, it threw me completely. This is the last straw. I've reported it to the office, and from now on I just behave with politeness. For the rest, she's had it.
Do you get on well together on stage, or do you find, Fenella, for example, that Kenneth makes things up as he goes along?
No. Well, he's got a very inventive mind.
Yes, but I'm always cooperative, very professional. Yeah, do you mind?
That line you put in.
No, the lines that you put in, if it comes to that, really.
Come, you two. No,
But Kenneth wasn't just unpredictable on stage, as the company understudy of 1/8 was to discover.
I found him very intimidating at first sight. And because he was very mercurial and very waspish and very very strong personality, and you had the feeling that he would reduce you to shreds with a look.
Film director Ken Loach was an aspiring young actor when he worked with Williams in 1961, and while the big star did extend the hand of friendship, his bonhomie could never be counted on.
We did establish some friendship based on the fact that I liked reading history books and he liked reading history books. So we used to talk about history quite a lot, and medieval history. He could be very nice, and then you'd start perhaps to start that conversation again in another situation, and he'd kind of cut you off at the knees. And so there was the kind of constant uncertainty about how you'd be received.
Williams' reviews were attracting some of the best writing talent around, including Harold Pinter, John Mortimer, and Cambridge Footlights star Peter Cook. Many of Cook's most famous sketches were originally written for Kenneth Williams to perform.
I've got a viper in this box, you know.
Really? Good gracious me.
Oh, yes, it's not an asp.
Oh, good.
Looks rather like one, but it's not one. Oh, no, I wouldn't have an asp.
No, I suppose not.
Some people can't tell the difference between a viper and an asp. More fool them, I say.
But ironically, it was Cook who killed off Kenneth's career in review when he began to perform the sketches himself.
My viper eats like a horse.
Like a horse, eh?
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, I'd like a horse.
By 1961, revue had a new look and a new breed of performers. Beyond the Fringe, starring Peter Cook and his Cambridge colleagues, opened in the West End and was considered so clever that nothing else could compete.
Beyond the Fringe, in a way, rubbished everything that had gone before. I mean, a lot was said in the papers about how effete the past review had been and how it wasn't relevant today. And in a way, it wasn't anymore. I mean, things change, things move on, and it was quite right that it should shift. And Kenneth certainly didn't think he fitted into that extraordinarily clever world. Although he was extraordinarily clever, ironically. He was extremely well read and extremely knowledgeable, but he hadn't been to university, and he felt, I think, like I did, very inferior to this new breed that suddenly swamped the theatre.
Williams' niche in the West End had collapsed, but work had started to come in from a very different direction. He'd been spotted in review by producer Peter Rogers and offered a role in a new comedy film. Without thinking too much about it, Williams took it.
So there we are, chaps. There's how we lay out our kit. One diagram among 24 people. Not very helpful.
Hello, Jim. Are you joining us? I thought you'd be in the cooler by now. All nice and individualistic.
I changed my mind. Sociologically, it's important for me to find out just how far one can retain one's individuality in the army.
Great Admiral here, Great Admiral here.
Williams' performances in the Carry On films would later overshadow all his other work. Over the next 20 years, he appeared in 22 of them, more than any other actor.
What happens if anything goes wrong? We have to amputate your leg.
But his attitude to them was always ambivalent.
Your misreading of my potential is sublime in its totality.
Get him out of here, Wilkins!
Charming.
I think there was a great love-hate relationship there. I think in terms of what was good about it, they gave him security, which there's no doubt about that. The sort of regular films being made every year were bringing in regular money. And I think another plus was the fact that it was like an extended family. Some of the people on them he loved, some of the people on them he hated, but of course all of that makes life. The bad side of them was it was a lot of the sort of bums and tits jokes and sort of the very base humour that, again, Kenneth found very easy to do. But I think underneath all that, that wasn't the reason he became an actor. And I think there was a certain pull there.
At this stage, the carry-on films were no more than a lucrative sideline for Williams. Success in the theatre was still what really mattered. There had been some heavyweight roles since St. Joan. Orson Welles had cast him in his London production of Moby Dick, and he'd played opposite Alec Guinness in Hotel Paradiso. But his opportunity to show what a fine comedy actor he could be came in 1962, when playwright Peter Shaffer, who would later pen Equus and Amadeus, chose Williams to star in the second part of his double bill, The Private Ear and The Public Eye.
He loved what he called the literacy of the play, and he loved that. And he would say, I really adore that kind of writing. It's proper writing. Do you know what I mean? And his nostrils would flare. And then he had this mixture of looking comic, but in fact he wasn't being comic at all. He was being deadly serious, and he was delighted and exalted by the prospect of speaking any words and sentences that had an elegance to them, or a sheen to them, or a verbal felicity to them.
Playing opposite him was a rising young actress named Maggie Smith. She soon recognised his mastery of comic technique, and Williams became her teacher as well as her co-star.
Ken eventually one day in that awful office at the Queen's Theatre said, "Look, Ducky," awful day. He said, "You know, you're being absolutely boring." And sort of went through it sentence by sentence and said, "You must make it. You would never say a sentence like that. You just wouldn't." I mean, I was literally learning a speech and just saying it as a speech, thinking, oh, how very clever, I've learned all the words. I'd never thought of colouring things as vividly as Kenneth does.
Yes, it is immediacy in actual fact, which is the greatest kind of gift in comedy. Because to make, you know, it's what you were saying earlier on about the challenge nightly with an audience, to make it seem as though it is coming out for the first time.
Yes,
to
and
make it
also,
seem that thoughts are occurring.
Also, yes, absolutely, and that you surprise the audience an awful lot of the time.
Kenneth's relationship with Maggie Smith was more than just professional.
They were twin souls, I think, in that way. They were very alike in some ways. And I was always aware that they had this, what I can call a kind of shining intimacy.
Would you say Kenneth had been quite a big influence on you?
An enormous influence. I mean, I pinch from him all the time.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, in black comedy, I'm doing a complete Kenneth. I mean, it's outrageous. If he hadn't seen it, he'd be livid.
This girl draws me like a magnet, and I am inextricably involved with her. It is a knot I will never want or be able to untie.
Friends like Maggie Smith were crucial to Williams and made his loneliness more bearable. More than anything, he loved family life and spent a great deal of time at the homes of fellow actors like Richard Pearson.
He was included in their families very, very much. And he loved that. He loved being part of it. He loved their children.
Williams thought so highly of marriage and the companionship it brought that he even sought it for himself.
I think he always felt that there was a domestic norm that he would like to conform to. He would like to be part of a married couple. And there were women, possibly 4 or 5 women, that he proposed a kind of celibate marriage to.
Annette Carr was to receive 3 marriage proposals over the years. The first when they appeared together in Rep.
One day, Kenneth came downstairs and told us all off because we left the sort of jelly bit under the soap in the soap dish. It was very messy. And the thing that you had to do was to bring your soap, your nail brush like that, put your soap on top of it, and then you didn't get the soap dish muggy. And so we all said, yes, Kenneth, right, Kenneth, you know. And so little after this, he suggested that I should marry him. So I said, oh, Kenneth, I don't think I could marry you. You're so fussy. Oh, he said. But he was so terribly fastidious, he would never in a way have been able to share accommodation of any kind with anybody else. And I think the fastidiousness is one of the things that contributed to the celibacy.
When I was young, we only had...
But Williams was looking for something more than a celibate marriage. It's clear from a previously unpublished diary extract that he had seriously considered adopting children and creating a family with one of the women to whom he proposed.
I said to Nora, we've both of us wasted our lives, and the days have run through our fingers like bathwater. And I went on about what we should have done 10 years ago and adopted the children and everything. And I know that fundamentally she agreed.
Of course, how that could have worked, one simply can't imagine. Except that the children, in his case, would have made a great deal of difference. He did like children so much. But she very rightly turned him down.
Meanwhile, Kenneth was having a difficult time with his own family. His parents' relationship had gone from bad to worse, and Charlie was in decline both mentally and physically.
And then the crisis came when he swallowed this stuff out of a bottle which said G's Linctus on it, which was, I don't know if it's still made, but it was a cough remedy of the time. But it turned out to be carbon tetrachloride. He does say in the diaries himself that it's mysterious how it got there.
Charlie never recovered. Kenneth was later to confide in friends that he believed his father had committed suicide.
So it's all over. The doctor told Louis his brain was damaged, that the heart was very impaired and kidneys in bad condition, that it was, in reality, a good thing, because he would have become much worse. Show went okay, audience good.
Williams now had to face up to a crisis in his career, his first West End flop. He was appearing as a Puck-like character in a Robert Bolt play, Gentle Jack, starring Edith Evans.
I remember after Gentle Jack, there was terrible booing and shouting, and she said to me as the curtain fell, "Well, I heard one bravo." And I said, "No, that was go home."
Later, Williams could joke about the experience, but at the time he was devastated by the criticism. He found he couldn't face performing without having the audience on his side, and he lost confidence in himself and in the play. In a pattern that would repeat itself, Williams fell back on what he knew would win him back the love of the audience.
The night I went, which was only about a week after it had opened, he came down this rope, and as soon as he hit the floor, he looked at the audience and went, "Hello." And of course the audience fell about laughing. And Dame Edith Evans wasn't at all amused. "Kenneth, you must stick to what's written on the page, boy." But I think the problem there for him was always the danger of, if he didn't get any laughs, what's going wrong, kind of thing. He was used to laughs.
Williams' comic persona was now a means of self-protection, but his reliance on it damaged his reputation in the theatre and meant he never became the kind of performer he'd wanted to be and knew he could be.
I suspect that Kenneth wouldn't allow himself to be the actor that I think he could have been. His slide rule was the audience. He's always afraid all of a sudden that, you know, he wouldn't be able to calculate. Because he was going the way he should have been going, but he was afraid to go that way.
Actors do get destroyed, but Kenneth was very, very deeply upset by being destroyed. So, in a way, I think that might be one reason why he stuck to being Kenneth, because he knew he could succeed as Kenneth. Do you know what I mean? It was a kind of defense mechanism. He couldn't be destroyed because everybody loved him.
But the problem for Kenneth Williams was that he still hadn't learnt to love himself.
I've never been loved in this show. I've never been loved. I've not been loved. Nobody loved me.
Of course we do.
No, you don't.
Yes, we all do. We all do.
Well, say it then.
We all love you.
Eddie Braden didn't say it. Make him say it.
Edwin.
Oh, very well, then.
Please.
I love you.
Stay with us for more from Reputations on Kenneth Williams, next.
It was the trial we knew everything about, except what the jurors thought.
Members of the jury, to properly understand Lady Chatterley's lover, we must be able to read it, unexpurgated.
Rippling. and melting her all molten inside.
There's never only sex though, is it? There's always more to it than that. It shakes you up.
Andrew Davies' new drama, The Chatterley Affair, next Monday at 9 on BBC4. Is time the same for all of us? Would you want to live forever?